Growing up, Janelle Potter had a difficult time making friends. The young woman was ostracized by her peers, due in part to her medical issues, and her parents, Marvin and Barbara Potter, tried to protect her as best they could. She was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes as a child, which her mother helped her maintain. She was also found to have hearing and speech difficulties, which made communicating hard for her. But, as children are oft to do, they honed in on what made Janelle different, and bullied her relentlessly. When Janelle would explain her struggles to her parents, and how others had singled her out and made her feel worthless, they would lash out at those who they were told were targeting their daughter. But that had the opposite effect. Janelle needing her parents to step in to defend her only made her more isolated, and the bullying continued. Marvin, a former Marine who had served in Vietnam and had earned the Navy Cross Medal for his heroism in battle, felt compelled to protect his daughters. He was strict with both Janelle and her older sister, Christy, often telling them that it was his job to protect them, the only way a father could. He would talk about his time in the Marines, and he, quote, knew how men think, unquote, and therefore he knew what needed to be done to ensure that his daughters were healthy and safe. As the girls grew up, they were both given strict guidelines by their parents. Christy would later break away from the family, realizing in her early adulthood how restrictive her parents were, and wanting to make her own way in life. But Janelle never did. She wasn't allowed to hang out with anyone they didn't know, having to meet and approve of her friends themselves. She was given a curfew of midnight every night, wasn't allowed to learn how to drive, and she wasn't allowed to date while living under their roof. The rules would have been understandable for a teenager, though they likely would have still found them oppressive. But as Janelle never moved out of her parents' home, she was still living under these guidelines when she turned 30. Christy would talk about her sister's issues in multiple interviews, stating that her parents would baby the young woman, and she believed that the majority of her medical issues were exaggerated. She would later testify under oath that Janelle would tell her parents that she wasn't able to do something on her own, likened to a medical malady, only to later brag that she no longer had to do said thing because her parents believed her. Having grown up with Janelle, she saw how Janelle was stifled by her parents' overbearing nature, but also watched as she used that to her advantage. Chrissy discussed how Janelle had a difficult time making friends, not because of her medical issues, but because of the pressure her parents put on her. She was a bit awkward, sure, but her issues were only exacerbated by her parents' continued assertions that she was unable to make friends or do anything on her own. Barbara Potter would contest that notion, stating that Janelle's diabetes was so severe that she could not possibly live on her own. In fact, Barbara would claim that she was Janelle's primary caregiver, managing all aspects of Janelle's treatments of diabetes as her adult daughter didn't know how to. In an interview with 2020 given in 2015, Barbara would state that Janelle didn't have the capacity to fully understand how to treat her own illness, as she had been diagnosed so young and never properly learned how to live with it. Because Barbara had taken care of Janelle's diabetes since her youth, she never thought to teach her daughter how to manage it because, as she stated, she would always be there for her. She also claimed that although Janelle was an adult, she was mentally much younger than her peers, stemming from their bullying and her isolation. Barbara would say her daughter was mentally in middle school. Her parents meant for these restrictions to protect Janelle, ensuring she was never put in a position where she needed her parents when they weren't around, but they had the unintended consequence of isolating the young adult even further. The only respite from Janelle's isolation was the internet, where she would regularly post on social media. But even this small amount of freedom was monitored by her parents. Neither Barbara nor Marvin knew much about tech in general, but they did what they could to make sure that Janelle stayed out of trouble. When Janelle created her first MySpace and Facebook accounts, they were her first friends, and closely monitored what she posted. In 2005, when Janelle would have been 24, she was given the chance to start over. Her family moved to Mountain City, Tennessee, a small town with less than 3,000 residents. For the first time in her young life, she was given the opportunity to reinvent herself, to take on more responsibilities, and to come into her own. She hoped that with the change of environment, she could establish some sort of independence and step out of the shadows. She had never had a job, been on her own to take care of herself, but the promise of a new city made everything feel possible. But in just a few short years, Janelle and her entire family would be sitting behind bars, tried and convicted for one of the most nonsensical crimes we've ever covered. Welcome back to another episode of Dreading, or if this is your first time here, hello there. Today, we are going to be reviewing the case of Billie Jean Hayworth and Billie Payne, two people who would lose their lives, all because of a sheltered young woman's lies. This video, like so many others, came in as a request via email. If there is a case you would like to see more attention brought to, or a topic you think merits a video, let us know by emailing us at dreading.official@gmail.com. We're constantly sorting through all of your recommendations and adding new topics to discuss every day. But with all of that said, let us begin. The move to Mountain City was supposed to signal the start of Janelle's new life, the chance for her to make new friends and potentially stand up on her own 2 feet. However, the opposite ended up being true. According to the young woman, the residents of Mountain City rejected her outright, as they had a negative bias towards people moving into their small town. When she would go out on her own, she once again was ridiculed and belittled. Although she would not go so far as to say how, she would simply state that townsfolk disliked outsiders, and when she tried to establish connection, she was met with hostility. Her posts on social media at the time were extremely general and generic, with her often writing about love, light, and laughter. As she had no social life and her parents believed her to be too ill to go out like other adults, Janelle often wrote about non-specific topics, like feeling good, being happy, appreciating life, were all regular posts from the young adult, and they received little interaction. In the meantime, she would go out of her way to watch the lives of others in her area. She would send friend requests to everyone she would interact with, try to establish some form of connection to the real world. If the person would accept her friend request, she would rifle through their social media, looking through all of their posts and imagining what she would do in their place. Janelle would fantasize about having a normal adult life, making friends, falling in love, and having a home of her own were all things that felt so far out of reach for the 20-something. But watching others her age and interacting with their social media gave her the smallest insight as to what that might be like. Despite all of the hostility, there would be one person who would be kind to Janelle. Tracy Greenwell was a pharmacist in the small town, and would see Janelle every time her mother would bring her to pick up her medications. They would talk every now and then, and from their few brief interactions, Tracy assessed that the 20-something was extremely lonely and sheltered. Her mother was always around, closely monitoring the woman, and Tracy got a sense that she wanted more from her life. Feeling bad for Janelle, she began to talk to the young woman more regularly and would invite her to hang out. Janelle was ecstatic for this change and quickly became a fixture at the Greenwell household. For the first time, Janelle could experience what it was like to have friends, to be important to people outside of her family, and she could see how other families interacted, and the contrast was stark. Tracy would state that during this time, Janelle would often opine about how overprotecting her parents had become. Seeing other young adults be on their own, have their own lives, and be completely independent made her long for what she felt had been taken away from her. She would watch her adult friends interact with their parents and see how they still held each other in mutual respect, and she couldn't help but feel as if she didn't have the same relationship with her parents, though she would never express these thoughts to them. When Janelle and Tracy became friends, Tracy's entire friend group opened up to the young woman. She would be invited out with them regularly, and it was on one of these nights that Janelle would meet Tracy's brother, Billie Payne. Billie was described as a funny guy, always going out of his way to make those around him laugh. He would play pranks and was constantly joking, which quickly caught Janelle's interest. Though Janelle was too shy to say anything to her friend's brother, after being introduced to him, she began to pine for the 36-year-old. He would regularly stop by Tracy's home and hang out with his sister while Janelle was present, and she would just watch him. Most reports would claim that Janelle hardly ever spoke to Billie, as she was too shy, but she would watch him like a hawk whenever she could. Her infatuation with Billie was noted by multiple people, as Janelle did little to hide her feelings. Although she would say otherwise, Janelle had very little first-person experience when it came to romance, so whenever she was close to him, her feelings were extremely obvious. Janelle had never felt so strongly about a person, and believed that her feelings were a sign that they were meant to be together. Billie, however, was not interested in Janelle, and was dedicated to his girlfriend, Billie Jean, and their newborn son. Oh boy, here we go. He was in love with his young girlfriend, and had made significant life changes in order to be with her, including becoming sober. He told those closest to him that he had made a lot of bad decisions in his life, but wanted to be someone who was worthy of Billie Jean, and that getting off drugs was just one of the ways he planned on doing that. Others in their life would comment on Billie and Billie Jean's relationship, stating that they were near a perfect match. And when Billie Jean would give birth to their first son, Tyler, the relationship only improved. Friends of the couple would say both flourished in their new paternal roles, and were excited to be parents. Despite Janelle's feelings towards Billie, neither he nor Billie Jean were untoward to the young woman, taking no issue with her presence when they would see each other. Though they were keenly aware of Janelle's feelings, they still treated her with kindness. But Janelle felt differently. She would often state that she felt Billie Jean would go out of her way to be unkind towards her, and would regularly say that the new mother was just jealous of her. Janelle would argue that Billie Jean was insecure in her relationship with Billie, as there was no way he would really love her, and that she would take out her insecurities on Janelle. Janelle elaborated on these claims, stating that Billie Jean targeted her because of her looks. When asked for specific examples of when Billie Jean had been cruel, the young woman would be unable to find any real-world examples, but simply stated that it was obvious that he was not happy with his current relationship, and that Billie Jean blamed her for that. After noting the tension in the group, Billie and Tracy decided to set Janelle up with their cousin Jamie Curd. Jamie, like Janelle, was interested in computers and often struggled with in-person interaction. Both were described as introverts, who had a difficult time coming out of their shell. However, their shared eccentricities created a sort of safety net in their relationship. Because both parties were uncomfortable engaging with large groups of people, neither felt pressure to do more than they were willing. Their relationship was somewhat of a struggle, given how overly involved her parents were in her life. She could still not post freely on Facebook, as her only way to access her account was on the family computer, and her parents still monitored her accounts. But they made it work. Jamie even went so far as to buy his girlfriend her own phone. That way they could talk privately whenever they wanted. While they were around their friends, they would hold hands and kiss openly, but Janelle's parents were none the wiser. She would attempt to warm her parents up to the idea of her dating by bringing Jamie to the family home, stating that he was a friend who could help them with their computer. At first, Barbara and Marvin were untrusting of the new man in Janelle's life, but as he came around more often, they began to relax a bit. But their inability to go fully public was not the couple's only issue. Jamie would state that his new girlfriend would consistently bring up Billie Jean in her relationship with Billie. She would tell her boyfriend that she didn't believe the two were in love, and that Billie Jean was just using her best friend's brother. Jamie disagreed, having interacted with the pair privately and spoken to Billie about his relationship, and felt that Billie Jean only brought the best out of him. He would counter Janelle's statements, telling her that he felt like the pair would go the distance, but noted that that response disgusted her. For the first time in Janelle's life, she had friends, a boyfriend who adored her, and was beginning to feel like a real adult. Her posts online were no longer generic quotes about loving life and being happy, but about things she was actually doing in the real world. She still lived with her parents, of course, but she felt as if she were turning the page, finally gaining some sort of independence. Though things were looking up in Janelle's life, her world was shaken when she became the focus of an online harassment campaign. The place she had used as an escape from mundanity was transformed, almost overnight, with anonymous accounts telling her that she was ugly, stupid, and that they were going to find her and kill her. These comments were graphic in nature, with some detailing how they were going to pay to have her sexually abused. Janelle was quickly overwhelmed by these anonymous comments, and brought them to her parents' attention. Barbara jumped into action, going onto her own Facebook account and responding to the comments, informing them that she was Janelle's mother and that they needed to stop. She also threatened to call the police on whoever was attacking her daughter, stating that they would no doubt find who was responsible and hold them accountable, but that did little to help. Barbara asked Janelle if she knew who could be behind the comments, as they were too specific and graphic to be a stranger. There was no way someone would randomly target Janelle like this, Barbara contended, as her daughter had no real enemies. After some prodding, Janelle eventually told her mother that there would be only one person who hated her enough to attack her this way, and that was Billie Jean. She informed her mother that Billie Jean had made it clear that she disliked Janelle, stemming from her own insecurities with her appearance and her relationship with Billie. She specified that Billie Jean had never done anything outright to make her animosity towards Janelle known, but the young mother always looked upset when she was around. Janelle also told her mother that when she would hang out with Tracy and Billie would join them, he had made his romantic feelings towards her known. She went further to claim that he had told their mutual friends that he had planned on breaking up with the mother of their newborn child to be with Janelle, despite the fact that she was not interested. None of these claims were ever backed up by any third parties, because they were obviously false. Janelle had never piqued Billie's interest, and Billie Jean had never been intimidated by the sheltered 30-year-old, but that didn't matter. The Potters had never met or interacted with this Billie Jean person, and they didn't believe their daughter was capable of lying, much less lying about something so complex. So from the moment Janelle stated Billie Jean was responsible for the attacks, they believed her. Janelle also brought up the comments to her friends, who initially railed around her. When they inquired as to who Janelle thought could be behind the attacks, she once again put the blame onto Billie Jean. Those who knew the young mother immediately called bullshit, as Janelle's story didn't make any sense. Billie was devoted to Billie Jean. He loved being a father, and they were happy in their relationship. There was no way Billie Jean felt threatened by Janelle's presence, especially when Billie had never mentioned being attracted to her in the first place. When pressed about her claims that Billie was going to leave Billie Jean for her, she was unable to say who told her as much, and those around her immediately wrote off her claims as being fictitious. Though Janelle insisted that Billie was romantically interested in her and wanted to break up with his girlfriend, their friends were quick to deduce that she was lying. It seemed that the only people who believed Janelle were her parents and her boyfriend, Jamie. Like Barbara and Marvin, Jamie began to view Janelle as someone who needed to be protected. In his eyes, she was so entirely sheltered that he needed to step up to the plate and protect her, and he took that responsibility very seriously. But believing Janelle came at the cost of his relationship to his family, save for Tracy. Tracy felt as if she were the only one in the situation who had kept a cool head. She believed that Janelle was being harassed, as when they talked about it in person, she seemed reliably paranoid as to who was stalking her. She described the young woman as being constantly on edge, and at the time felt as though no one person could act that well. But she also knew that Billie Jean was not behind the bullying. She felt as if Janelle was simply paranoid as to who was behind the attacks, and in her paranoia, had wrongfully accused Billie Jean. In response, Billie Jean and Billie had become antagonistic toward the young woman, given that they had been wrongfully accused. Both sides, she felt, were angry for no reason, and simply needed to talk things out. Tracy tried to get the two sides together to talk through their issues, and see that neither party was as bad as the other side, but the rift between the two camps would only grow wider. As time went on, Janelle continued to be attacked anonymously online, with messages being posted on her Facebook wall at all times of the day, and with each comment, she became more sure that it was Billie Jean behind the cyberstalking. But then the harassment began to escalate. Janelle claimed to be on the receiving end of countless prank calls, where the person on the other line would make repeated threats to her safety or simply breathe heavily into the receiver. At night, she would report that this person was also repeatedly driving past the home. More specifically, the side of the home her room was on in order to scare her. She was sure that this was Billie Jean, wanting to hurt her for damaging her relationship. She was so certain that it was Billie Jean behind the harassment that on at least one occasion, she and her mother verbally accosted the young mother while she was pumping gas. According to the gas station attendant, Hayworth was outside next to her car when another vehicle approached. The occupants of said vehicle then began to verbally accost the young mother in front of her child. Though the witness could not hear what was said, she stated that Billie Jean was noticeably shaken by the encounter. The witness then came out of the gas station and asked if Hayworth wanted her to call the police, at which point Barbara and Janelle fled the scene. Billie Jean thanked the attendant and stated that the mother and daughter duo had called her trash, and had also gone so far as to say she didn't deserve to have her son, who was in the backseat of the car. She also informed her that Janelle had repeatedly stated that she hoped her son died, just to hurt her. At the same time, an account by the name of Matt Potter began posting to the Mountain City page of the Topics website. Topics, for those who are unaware, is a replacement for Craigslist, and is often used for people to anonymously ask about certain things going on in the area, or complain about certain things without judgment. Janelle had previously claimed that Matt Potter was her brother on Facebook, although, as far as we were able to find, she does not have a brother. Regardless, this account began to talk viciously about Billie Jean and two of her closest friends, Lindsay Thomas and Tara Osborne. They repeatedly called them no-good whores, posted unflattering images of them, and accused them of breaking the law. Another account bolstered these claims, going by the name of Kelly. Whoever was behind the Kelly account would go on to state that Matt was right about Billie Jean and her friends, going so far as to claim that one of them had HIV, and that they were guilty of harassing Janelle. The following is an example of what was posted to the forums. Wow, Matt and Kelly. I knew she was bad, but I had no clue she was off on the deep end. She is crazy, that's for sure. Sounds like all of them are. I know Billie Jean, that bitch, has lived with more guys and have sex with 80% of Mountain City, and Lindsay, I would say half of Mountain City, then you trade, and Butler, and you have... and then Johnson City. Who the fuck, what asshole wrote this? Okay, wait, I think I got it. And then you have Doe and then Johnson City and then Kingsport. She has been all over. And she does have HIV. This is all around town. And Tara, bracket, she will give it to anyone her poor husband. He's a nice guy, but he never wants to be home with her. I think when his baby is 18, he will leave her dumbass too. She is a whore too. I agree with you both, and this girl, the defendant, do know, as in passing, but she is a good girl, and she was brought up right, and you can tell everything is you're welcome and hello and thank you, and she just a sweet girl. I will be praying for Janelle, and as far as other ones go, they're no good whore sluts, and that is carrying something and giving it to everyone. Damn, girls. They live in high school still, and they need to grow up. The other two examples of this that were made available in the court documents will be linked in the description box down below, but before we get to these specifically, we need to draw your attention to how each party is referred to in these comments. Starting with Billie Jean and her female friends, they are all disparaged, with a specific focus being placed on their promiscuity. Those girls are painted as being evil sexual deviants who destroy the men they come into contact with. They are inflicted upon others, and so the concept of them having sex, having relationships, and even just talking to men becomes an act of malice. The men in the situation are being duped in a sense, and taken for a ride by these three. They are the poor patsies who really just need a good girl to take care of them, someone like Janelle. Meanwhile, look at how Billie is referred to. He is not talked about with as much vitriol as his fiancée and her friends. And the commenter goes on to state that he is just a nice guy who is slowly finding out his girlfriend is evil. The concept of him leaving Billie Jean is something that is celebrated, but she is the main villain in this story. Then Janelle is referred to as a sweet girl who doesn't deserve this kind of torment. A comment like this can be exceedingly illuminating, as whoever left it clearly hates Billie Jean primarily, and likes Billie so much that they are looking for ways to excuse his choice to be with her. They infantilize him, almost, implying that he was not capable of seeing how maniacal his fiancée is, and trying to use him working as a sign of stress in the relationship, almost as if the person were trying to convince themselves that if Billie Jean weren't around, they could be with Billie. The comments continued, with Matt Potter writing, Janelle is a sweet person, and people try to get her, but she has a lot of us behind her, if she knows us or not. But her dad is big timed. He will deal with the rest of this shit. They're fucking whores, and that's all this town is, and drugs. I know for sure Billie Jean and Miss Thomas did drugs together, and I know Miss Thomas does meth she gets off Jason. I know way too much, lol. I love that Janelle's not like them, and she stayed sweet. They are dumb assholes, motherfuckers, get what's coming their way, and they don't know who I am. Okay, so now we have the account gleefully talking about how no one knows who they are, which is a strange thing to do on an account that was said to have belonged to Janelle's fictional brother. But this comment is also telling. Again, specific attention is paid to Billie Jean and her friends. They are sex-crazed drug addicts who can't help but attack the virtuous and beautiful Janelle. Meanwhile, Janelle is characterized as being sweet, classy, and not like them at all. Moreover, her dad is described as being big time, implying that his time in the Marines and the CIA make him a force to be reckoned with, although at the time of writing he had become incredibly ill, needing to use an oxygen tank regularly, and had to walk with a cane. The comments continued with Matt writing, well, I guess Billie don't know that have his number and his Safẽ is being taped. Ha, I know what he said about Janillian. It was wrong. He's a fucking work. When these is girl Sarah doing this to Janelle, and we got our stuff. And Janelle, I'm sure, has stuff too. I'm going to be posting numbers if they don't stop booshing Janelle, and that fucking Billie Giannis getting so fat. That baby she looks like a chipmunk that's eating too many nuts. LOL. I hope she loses that baby in time. It don't need a mother like Billie Jean, and Billie he's no father by the way he acts and talks. Sooner thy move out of town, the better. I think something about getting a house. I hope he can't get it. I hope they have to live out in the woods. More bitter for Chipmunk. She can't make friends out there. And fuck deer and bear and whatever else. I hope a bear would eat her, but the way she looks, but it would go ruining the other way. LOL. Ugly a bitch whore? Can't leave no one alone. Druggy whore, a bit? Ass bitch. Okay, ass bitch, of course. Go fuck a damn tree for all I care. Leave Janelle alone. Okay, everyone still here? Everyone got that? Yeah, that's definitely not Janelle. These comments would become even more violent, with Matt Potter stating he was going to kill her if she didn't stop harassing Janelle, and other seemingly related accounts telling the young mother to go have intercourse with animals. As Janelle had claimed, the Matt Potter account belonged to her otherwise unknown brother. Billie and Billie Jean quickly deduced that the comments must be coming from someone in Janelle's family, if not Janelle herself. They printed out page after page of harassment they had received, documenting every comment in a 3-ring binder that they then presented to Tracy. Tracy had been Janelle's access point to the rest of the town, her first and only real friend outside of her family, but when the pharmacist was shown every comment besmirching her future sister-in-law, she finally broke down. She sent the following message to Janelle via Facebook. Your friend Matt needs to leave Billie Jean and Lindsay off of the Topic's website. You lost my brother as a friend, and I'm not happy with you either. In response, Janelle stated that she didn't know who this Matt person was, and that she had done nothing wrong, and that the comments that were being made on the Topic's website had nothing to do with her. She seemingly forgot that she had previously stated that he was her brother. She tried her best to assure her only friend that she had not been involved with what occurred, but would also bring up her negative feelings towards Billie Jean whenever she could. Other Facebook friends and acquaintances would state the same, claiming that when Janelle would message them via social media, she would always find a way to bring up Billie Jean supposedly harassing her. She would claim that she was deeply scared and that the added stress of cyberstalking was causing her health to deteriorate. If these acquaintances ever pushed back or questioned Janelle's claims, she would attack them, claiming that they were actually the ones behind the stalking, working alongside Billie Jean. One of the people Janelle would accuse of this was Tara Osborne, who barely knew Janelle. She had been lumped in on the Topic's forum, but had tried her best to remain on friendly terms with the sheltered woman, not wanting to provoke her. Janelle would message her nearly every day, always bringing up her negative feelings toward Billie Jean. Tara would attempt to avoid Janelle's messages and ghost the young woman, making it so her friends could not see if she was online or she had read their messages, but that didn't stop Janelle. Eventually, Tara would remove her from her friends list, hoping that she would get the message. Instead, Janelle wrote to her to ask if she had done anything wrong. Tara, wanting to pacify the woman she believed was harassing her friend, claimed that she was just cleaning up her friends list to be only close friends and family, and that she harbored no ill will towards her, but the damage was already done. Shortly thereafter, Janelle began accusing Tara of vandalizing her mailbox and making repeated calls to her family home. Tara denied this and informed Janelle that she had really unfriended her because she was tired of seeing the constant drama that surrounded her online activity, which only set Janelle off even more. Eventually, Tara would go to the police and file an order of protection against Janelle. This order was later dismissed because, according to court records, a lack of statutorily required relationship between the parties. Lindsay Thomas would similarly file a harassment complaint against Janelle, as the 30-year-old had taken to calling her upwards of 20 times a day without disguising her phone number. This case would also be dismissed, although the why was not made as readily available. Janelle herself would state that both cases were dismissed because the judge looked at the details and determined that it was Lindsay and Tara who were antagonizing her, which was not true. Instead, it seemed that on both occasions, the court failed to take either claim seriously and dismissed the cases, thinking nothing would come of it, but they were wrong. The Potter family claimed to have lived in constant fear, believing that whoever was targeting their youngest daughter would make good on their threats and attack her, and their fears were fully realized one night when a small rock was allegedly thrown at the Potter family home. Reports vary about if the rock was simply thrown at the home itself or at a window, but either way, the rock was found outside of the home in their yard, with Billie and Billie Jean's name on it. Barbara and Marvin were convinced that this was proof that the couple were targeting their innocent daughter, and Barbara went to the police. She told them everything that Janelle had told her, how the pair was determined to make their life more difficult, and how they had written horrible things on her wall, and how they weren't going to stop harassing until she was dead. When asked if she had any direct evidence, Barbara pointed to the rock bearing the couple's name and insisted that they knew that the pair was behind it, but the police stated there was nothing that they could do. At the most, they had a rock, but they couldn't even reliably say if the rock had been thrown at the home or merely left in the yard. Janelle's relationship with Jamie was still going strong, despite the continued drama surrounding her and his family. In fact, Jamie went so far as to buy Janelle a ring, and the couple began to discuss eloping, even though their parents still didn't know nor approve of her dating. However, Janelle also began talking to another man via Facebook. This man was named Bob Meehan, and he lived in Pennsylvania. Though the two had never met in person, Bob believed that they were in a serious, committed relationship with each other. Around this time, Billie and Billie Jean would make the decision to remove Janelle as a friend on Facebook. They wanted to move on from Janelle and all of her drama, and Billie wound up asking Billie Jean to marry him shortly thereafter. But these two actions would have unintended consequences. On January 31st, 2012, Brad Osborne would drive to Billie and Billie Jean's home at 6:30 a.m. in order to pick up Billie's father. Osborne and Billie's father would often carpool to work together, but that morning, Mr. Payne had left on his own. Brad arrived at the home and waited in his car for Mr. Payne, but when he didn't appear, Osborne became concerned. He entered the home via the rear sliding glass door, as the Paynes seldom locked their home, and called out to his coworker, but was only met with the sound of an alarm clock ringing. After a few moments, he left the residence to go to work, noting that it seemed like no one was home. 4 hours later, at around 10 a.m., another friend of the Paynes would arrive at the home. This friend was Roy Stevens, a former neighbor who often picked up mail for the Payne family. Roy would enter the home through the sliding back door and called out for Billie and Billie Jean, having noted both cars in the driveway. When he got no response, he ventured further into the home and found a horrific sight. In one of the first bedrooms, he found Billie's dead body. Billie had been lying on his back on the bed and was covered in his own blood. At first, Roy had no idea what had happened to his former neighbor, or if he was still alive, and attempted to revive him by grabbing him by the shoulders and shaking him. When that didn't work, he ran out of the home and told his wife to call 911. Roy's wife Linda was CPR trained and went inside the home to try and provide aid. When she found Billie, she noted that his body was cold and stiff, and that he had been horrifically beaten prior to his death. It was only when she attempted to find a pulse that she realized that his throat had been slashed. Upon realizing that he was a lost cause, she went to the living room to call 911. While on the line with emergency services, Linda would go on to hear what she described as the most horrifying noise. Somewhere in the home, Billie's child was stirring, and she had no idea where he was, if he had been near his father when he was killed, and if he was okay. She followed the source of the sound, and it was on the phone with emergency services when she discovered Billie Jean's dead body, holding her 7-month-old son in her arms. Luckily, the son was unharmed, but the scene was obviously horrific. Whoever had killed Billie and Billie Jean had done so while she was holding onto their child, and they had left the child in the dead mother's arms for hours. Billie and Billie Jean had both been shot in the head, but it would seem that Billie had been able to put up somewhat of a fight. However, he had been nearly nude when the attack took place, and whatever had attacked him was able to get the upper hand, beating him until finally shooting him in the head, then slitting his throat. Billie Jean, it seems, was caught by surprise, and was shot one time, killing her at once. Mountain City was a small town where everyone knew everyone else, and when the police began their investigation, multiple people would bring up the couple's issues with Janelle. The day after the bodies had been found, Chief Deputy Joe Woodard would talk to the Potter family about the murders. The Potters were united, all stating that while they didn't like Billie and Billie Jean, and they wouldn't mourn their deaths anytime soon, they had not been involved in the killing. Moreover, they went over the laundry list of claims they had against the pair, with Woodard noting how keen they were to disparage the deceased. Shortly after talking to the Potters, the police were able to determine that Janelle had been hiding her relationship with Jamie from her parents, which led them to believe that there was likely more that the young woman was hiding from them. The police continued to look at other potential suspects after the murder, but it seemed every other lead would trace back to the Potters. Later that week, the police would bring Jamie in for questioning, feeling as if he could provide the best insight into the case. He was related to the victims, but was seemingly on their lead suspect's side. Whatever happened, he surely knew more than he was saying. As the police spoke to Jamie, he became more and more nervous. It was obvious that he was hiding something, but was not breaking. The police then asked Jamie if he would be willing to take a lie detector test that day, to which he agreed. As we have covered in countless videos before, a lie detector test does not actually detect lies, but signs of stress in the body. They are not indicative of whether or not a person is telling the truth, and as such, are not admissible in court. But the police still use them in interrogations as a tool to garner confessions, and in this instance, when Jamie stated that he did not know the identity of Billie and Billie Jean's killer, the device showed deception. The police used this potential deception as a basis for the remainder of their questioning, repeatedly telling Jamie that if he knew what happened, it would be in his best interest to tell them, and repeatedly that they could help him, but only if he told them the truth. 6 hours into the interrogation, having failed a polygraph and believing that the police would understand, Jamie then asked them a strange question. He inquired as to whether or not the CIA was present. The police were immediately confused. Sure, the double homicide had been horrific, but why would Central Intelligence, whose main goal is collecting foreign intelligence, be interested in a small-town murder? When the police questioned him further, he elaborated and told one of the most obviously fake stories we have ever stumbled across. Jamie informed the investigators that over the past couple of months, while Janelle and her family had been dealing with the cyberstalking, they had been reached out to by a man who had claimed to be part of the CIA, named Chris. According to the Potters, Chris was just a random man who happened to stumble across the targeted harassment campaign being levied at Janelle and felt motivated to help the young woman. He specifically cited that she was a good girl and didn't deserve the hate she was getting from others, just like the accounts on Topics had said. But that was how the Potters would claim they came into contact with Chris. Jamie would tell the police that he first heard about Chris from Janelle. She claimed that he was a family friend and told her boyfriend that Chris was like a brother to her. She went further to state that they were exactly the same age, and he had been her next-door neighbor growing up, even driving her to and from school. She told a similar story to Bob Meehan, the man she was also in a secret, long-distance relationship with. After Janelle told Jamie about Chris, she informed him that the Central Intelligence agent was helping her combat the online attacks. He informed the man that he was a government agent, with only the topmost clearance, and as such, the majority of his work was classified. Moreover, he couldn't simply talk to Jamie through normal means, but would only communicate to him through Janelle's phone and email, which he could somehow access. He would also claim to have a severe phobia of phones, making it impossible for them to talk to each other. Chris would, quote, talk to the Potters and Jamie nearly every day, sending them ranting emails about how evil and sick Billie Jean and her friends were, telling them that he was working on their case, and had found evidence that the other women were obsessed with Janelle and trying to get her killed. Most notably, he talked to Barbara the most, building such a strong relationship with her that she began to refer to Chris as being like a son to her. Chris began to fan the flames of the feud, convincing Marvin and Barbara that Janelle was in danger, and that if they didn't do something, the young woman would be killed. When Barbara went to the police, armed with the rock that had been allegedly thrown at their home, and was turned away, she began to believe that the only way her daughter would be kept safe would be if they took matters into their own hands, which Chris gleefully encouraged. He told the Potters that if they were to do anything, like, say, kill Billie Jean and her husband, that he could pull some strings in the CIA and exonerate them. Bro, I've seen this movie. This is the plot to Mission Impossible 7. But I digress. Jamie believed that Chris was real, based on how the Potters talked about him. Barbara would repeatedly state that he was like a son to her. Marvin would claim that he was a former Central Intelligence agent. He knew Chris was the real deal, and Janelle stated she knew him personally. It didn't even occur to Jamie that they could be lying. All of them. Man, she's that phony baloney. This is ridiculous. Chris had encouraged Barbara and Marvin Potter to kill Billie Jean and her friends, repeatedly saying the woman wouldn't stop until Janelle was dead. The night prior to the murders, Chris would write to the family and tell them that he had uncovered that one of their tormentors had put a bounty on Janelle's head for $3,000, and that the only way it would stop would be to kill Billie and Billie Jean as soon as possible. How the fuck did anybody fall for this? Are you serious? That night, Jamie came over to the Potter house to help them with a computer issue and was taken aside by Marvin. The supposed former Central Intelligence agent would ask Jamie if he would be willing to do him a favor. Without specifying a date or time, he asked his daughter's secret boyfriend if he would be willing to drive him to Billie's home, drop him off, go down the road to keep a lookout, then pick him back up. Though not explicit with what he wanted to do, it was clear that Marvin was asking if Jamie would be willing to help, and at the very least, attack his cousin with his girlfriend's father. And Jamie, for his part, agreed. The following morning, Jamie got a call from Marvin, cashing in the favor. Moments later, Janelle texted her boyfriend, informing him that her father was on his way over. The two men then drove to a parking lot near Billie's home. They monitored the home until Billie's father left, at which point they walked to a shed behind Payne's residence. Jamie, it would seem, did not comprehend what they were there to do, as he repeatedly told Marvin that if Billie were to see them, they would get in trouble. But Marvin continued forward. When they arrived at the residence, he gave Jamie a gun and told him that he just needed to stand outside and keep watch. He entered the home and killed both Billie and Billie Jean, but left their son untouched, as in his mind, he was not at fault for what happened with Janelle. After Jamie told the police everything he knew about Chris and the murders, they quickly deduced that whoever he was talking to was in no way affiliated with the CIA. Instead, they determined that Chris was likely just Janelle. No kidding. Given that she hadn't even changed her fucking phone number or email address when contacting them. Jamie's story was outlandish, and given that he had spent the prior 6 hours of the interview lying directly to their faces, the police felt like they needed more substantial evidence before they brought the Potters in for questioning. Jamie agreed to call the Potters, and within a few short hours, the police knew, without a shadow of a doubt, what had happened the morning of January 31st. When Jamie called the Potters, Barbara answered the phone and spoke with him for a few moments. She repeatedly made references to Chris, and said that he had informed her that Jamie had been arrested for the murders. She seemed on edge, as if she was worried about the man she had used as free tech support turning on the family, but he placated her, stating that he had only been questioned by police and had passed a polygraph test. Jamie told Barbara that he was worried after speaking to the police, and that he wanted to make sure that Marvin had taken care of all the evidence against him. Barbara then put her husband on the phone, and when asked if he got rid of everything from Bill's, he agreed, proving that he had, at the very least, participated in the murder. The following day, the police obtained a search warrant and arrested Marvin. However, as the search was underway in the home, Barbara attempted to destroy evidence, repeatedly grabbing items that the police were taking and tearing them apart. She did this with a stack of papers, as well as multiple photographs that the family had around the home. These papers were later found to be emails between the family members and screenshots of the victims' social media, with disparaging things written on them. During the search of the Potter residence, investigators found a green spiral notebook on a desk next to the computer monitor, which contained passwords to various internet accounts, including passwords for both the defendant's and Barbara's AOL email accounts. These accounts were then connected to the topics page, and multiple accounts had been used to harass Billie Jean. Police attempted to garner a confession from Marvin, but he repeatedly denied having anything to do with Billie and Billie Jean's murder. They then showed the veteran the plethora of evidence they had against him, though he continued to deny any part in the crime, and asked simply to be allowed to speak to his wife. Following this interview, he called Barbara and confessed to having murdered the couple. It seemed that Marvin had forgotten that he was on a recorded line as he repeated that he killed the couple to protect her and Janelle. Barbara, however, denied that he was capable of murder, and, with the understanding that the call would make him look guilty, attempted to give him an alibi for the murders. When Marvin would state that he was responsible for the killings, she would interject, saying she knew he was lying because he had been at home the morning of the killings, and she had seen him. Later on, she would state that the police had questioned Marvin under questionable circumstances, as he hadn't been given his medication, and they didn't allow him to bring his oxygen. She argued that his confession should not be played in court, as he hadn't been in his right mind when he gave it, and that the police were guilty of forcing a confession in this instance. But the evidence stated otherwise. Despite Barbara's attempts at destroying evidence, the police were able to piece together thousands of emails between Chris and the family, and were able to determine that all of the communication that came from the CIA operative actually came from the family computer. And as Janelle had a distinct writing style that involved improper capitalization, transposing of letters, and the remaining E from the root word and adding the suffix ing, they were able to match all the emails to her. Moreover, all the comments that had been made harassing Billie Jean while praising Janelle had the same writing style, proving that she had been the one behind the harassment campaign. The police were able to find months and months worth of communication between Chris and the family, goading them into hurting Janelle's enemies. He repeatedly told Barbara that her daughter was going to be killed, that there was a real tangible danger to their lives, and that the police would not help them. For months, Janelle tried to convince those closest to her that she was being attacked, that people were going to kill her, and that she needed to be saved by them. But when the evidence was shown in court, Janelle claimed that she was innocent. Her lawyer argued that Janelle had the mind of a middle schooler and was functionally unable to devise such an evil scheme. Meanwhile, Barbara Potter would maintain that both she and her husband were unable to carry out the crime due to their age and own illnesses. Neither Barbara nor Janelle would admit to so much as authorizing the emails that were found in their home, with Barbara stating she doesn't have enough hate in her heart to do such a thing. Marvin, Barbara, and Janelle Potter would all be given 2 life sentences, a fitting sentence for the 2 lives they helped take. Jamie agreed to a plea deal of 2 concurrent sentences of 25 years in prison. However, in 2021, Barbara was able to appeal her sentence, with her lawyers arguing that her original trial attorney had a conflict of interest while defending her because he represented her husband. However, instead of a retrial, Barbara agreed to a plea deal and admitted she took part in the orchestration of the murder. She was then sentenced to 25 years in prison. This case was extremely interesting to go over, as while it has been covered plenty of times by places like 2020 and Nightline, the court documents are filled with smaller details that are often left out, like Marvin Potter had served in Vietnam, and would often talk about how he had worked for the CIA afterwards. He maintained a lot of his work was classified, and repeatedly talked about how he knew plenty of the country's secrets. But that was obviously patently false. There is no evidence that he was ever involved with the intelligence agency, and moreover, we were able to find a post on the Stolen Valor website showcasing how he lied about his Marine history and stole his Navy Cross Medal, which is the second highest military award for valor. A lot of the lies Janelle told, which would seem obvious to most people with a shred of sense, were handed down from her father, who spent who knows how long telling people false stories of his own heroism. The more I was able to find, the more unavoidable something like this seemed. The Potter family was primed for this sort of turmoil, and it is frankly a strange sight to behold. I encourage you all to, if you're interested, check out the description box down below and read some of the court documents. There are portions that either felt too superfluous or unimportant to add to the video, but are nonetheless very interesting to read. If you've made it to this portion in the video, let me know what you think in the comments down below. If you want to see more of our videos and your recommendations, consider liking and subscribing. And if you have a topic you would like to see us cover, email me at dreading.official@gmail.com. With all of that said, I hope you have a great day, and remember to stay Safẽ. That's the French word for safe, right? I'm fancy? Okay.